But my name is Robert Avsek, and I'm a proud member of the West Virginia chapter of Moms Demand Action for Gun Violence in America. And thank you for joining us for this 2003 Wear Orange event. Wear Orange originated on June 2nd, 2015, on what would have been Hadiya Pendleton's 18th birthday. It began with teenagers in Chicago who wanted to honor their friend, Hadiya, after she was shot and killed. Today, Wear Orange honors Hadiya and the more than 120 people who are killed every day in the United States, as well as the hundreds more who are wounded and the countless others who witness acts of gun violence. However, our efforts to reduce gun violence are not confined to one day or one weekend each year. Every day, the 10 million plus volunteers of Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense in America are tirelessly advocating for research-backed solutions to the gun violence that plagues our country. Moms Demand Action is a nonpartisan organization that has grown from its humble beginnings on Facebook, on the kitchen table of our founder, Shannon Watts, following the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting, and we have become the largest gun violence prevention group in the United States. I'd now like to take a few minutes to appreciate the contributions of the following individuals, the leaders of our West Virginia Moms Demand Action chapter, for their dedication in reducing gun violence in West Virginia and in our nation. First is our outgoing state lead, Tasha Pelfrey. And back there working the food concessions is our own Deanna Mckinney, who's our incoming state lead. Dee Price Childers, our state interfaith lead. Jim McJunkin, our state legislative lead. Elizabeth Hill, our state data lead. Hadiya Pendleton, our Charleston event lead, and the mover and the shaker behind this event right here. Come on, give it up for Hadiya Pendleton, come on. Sarah Gotlieb, our community outreach leader. And a very special thank you and shout out, and please give a warm Charleston welcome to our Everytown organizing manager, straight from Arkansas, Amy Gillespie. All right, at this time I'd like to call upon Jim McJunkin, who has a proclamation.
Good evening, can you hear me? Okay. I'm Jim McJunkin, I'm a pediatrician here in Charleston, and glad to be a part of this effort. It's so wonderful that you're here. Thank you so much. I want to thank Mayor Amy Goodman for making this proclamation this evening, which I will read on her behalf. She's at a mayor's conference currently. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I will start here. Whereas, to help honor all local victims and the 100 Americans whose lives are cut short and the countless survivors who are injured by shootings every day, a national coalition of organizations designated the first Friday in June as National Gun Violence Awareness Day. And whereas the color orange is a color that symbolizes the value of human life, anyone can join this campaign by pledging to wear orange on June 2nd, the first Friday in June in 2023. And whereas we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence and encourage responsible gun ownership to help keep our children safe. Now, therefore, on behalf of Amy Schuler Goodwin, Mayor of the City of Charleston, do hereby proclaim Friday, June 2nd, 2023 as Gun Violence Awareness Day in Charleston, West Virginia, and encourage all citizens to help raise awareness about gun violence and honor the lives of gun violence victims and survivors. I have set my hand and caused the sealed executive department to be affixed this second day of June 2023. Amy Schuler Goodwin, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce some speakers who are going to give us some words of wisdom on this austere occasion. Our first speaker today is Mike Pushkin. Mike is the chair of the West Virginia Democratic Party and a Democratic member of the West Virginia House of Delegates, representing District 37 that includes Charleston's West Side, East End, Downtown, and North Charleston since 2014. You might not know this, but he is also a taxi driver when the legislature is not in session, and in that role he's seen a side of Charleston that's oblivious to many politicians, and unfortunately he's been held at gunpoint. Please welcome Delegate Mike Pushkin.
Thank you. That was a very dramatic introduction. I appreciate that. Hi. Thanks for inviting me here. My name is Mike Pushkin. I have the honor of representing this district, which is now District 54, in the House of Delegates. And first I want to thank Reverend Biondi for opening up our church and the congregation here at St. Mark's for allowing us to be here today and welcoming us into their homes. How about a round of applause for the congregation and Reverend Biondi here at St. Mark's. And I also want to thank you for inviting me to be here today to share a few brief comments and thoughts with you. And I appreciate that, and I'm honored to be here. And I'll come back continually year after year as long as we have to do it. Unfortunately, we have to continue to do this. I would like to get up here and say that, as we watch these horrific events that happen across the country, almost several times a month it seems, and we see mass shootings that occur all over the country, I would like to get up here and say, well, we've been lucky here in West Virginia because it hasn't happened here yet. But I can't say that because while we haven't seen those types of mass shootings like you've seen in Texas and in Colorado, I'm looking at the wall here, and I know so many more of victims of people who've had their young lives cut down way too early for absolutely no reason because someone makes a very permanent decision about a very temporary problem. And I know that in West Virginia, in spite of being such a small state, we are disproportionately affected by senseless gun violence here. And a lot of that has to do with the lack of willingness from our elected leaders just to pass laws that make sense, and a lack of willingness to listen to their constituents and not the powerful gun manufacturer lobby. And that's what I refer to as the gun lobby. They're not representing the owners, they're representing the manufacturers. Let's be honest about it. And that's why we have policy that doesn't always make sense, unfortunately. And I know right before I was elected the first time, they passed a statewide law that would prohibit municipalities like Charleston from passing ordinances, common sense gun ordinances that we had on the books here in Charleston since the 80s. That actually worked. It actually lowered the amount of senseless gun violence in Charleston. Those ordinances were working. And then the legislature overturned, said a city couldn't pass a gun ordinance. Now, it only makes sense that a city like Charleston or a city like Huntington should be able to make decisions for themselves. And their duly elected mayors and city council members should be able to make decisions for their constituents that they live around and work with every day. But the legislature passed something that didn't make sense and said, no, the municipalities aren't able to make those decisions for themselves anymore. And it doesn't make sense that when a bill like that passes, that a city like Charleston has to provide gun lockers in a recreational building that houses preschool programs in our public recreation buildings, community centers. That's the word I'm looking for. In our community centers, it doesn't make sense that we have to do that, but we do because of legislation that doesn't make sense. And Yeah, it doesn't make sense that, with Rick Griffith here, former Delegate Danielle Walker here, I don't think any of us ever heard any phone calls from constituents about allowing guns in dorm rooms on college campuses. So 18 and 19-year-olds, first time out of the home, could bring dangerous weapons into the dorms, where often they're not practicing the best judgment. I've not heard any call for that, but that was the top priority, not of the gun lobby, of the gun manufacturing lobby. And that's why we get legislation like that that doesn't make sense. And these have real world consequences. I just saw there was a report that was just put out, a statement by WVU that due to their lack of enrollment, due to their low enrollment, they're cutting important programs like their postgraduate programs in secondary education and elementary education, put out teachers who have master's degrees. They're no longer able to do that because of the decline in student enrollment. Do you think that campus carry is going to lead to greater student enrollment in West Virginia? It's only going to exacerbate the problem. Now, if you're a parent in New Jersey, a parent in Ohio, and you have 50 states to choose from where to send your graduating senior, and you say, West Virginia just passed this law that makes absolutely no sense to allow freshmen in the dorms to be armed, you might think twice about sending your child here to West Virginia to go to school. We already have low enrollment. It's already having an effect on the curriculum offered at WVU. So it affects a whole lot of things when you have a legislature that doesn't listen to common sense and instead listens to one of the most powerful lobbies up there, the gun manufacturer lobby. So, like I said, I'm honored to be here with you, and I think that we need to continue talking, continue having events like this, and to continue talking to our leaders and demanding that they listen to constituents, that they listen to common sense, and quit listening to these powerful lobbyists that don't represent the people. Nobody has asked for the legislation that they've passed, and it's having a very harmful effect. You just continue to look around the city of Charleston and see what kind of effect that it's had. And I can just ask you to let's keep it up, and let's keep demanding common sense, keep demanding that your leaders listen to you, and not listen who was paid to talk, not listen to somebody who was simply paid to talk to them. So I really appreciate you having me here, and love you all, and thanks, and come back as many times as you ask me. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
All right, before I introduce our next speaker, I'll give you a did you know piece of information. Did you know that West Virginia ranks 7th in the United States when it comes to suicides? And that is a gun violence problem that's promulgated by the fact that firearms are so readily available that when people find themselves in a dark place and they think that that's the only solution, the prevalence of guns just gives them easy access to, as someone mentioned earlier today, a permanent solution to a temporary problem. So, our next speaker is Max Gotlieb. Max was born and raised in Charleston. He has a lifelong love of all things West Virginia. He was determined to return here after college and law school to contribute to his community and state. He's an associate attorney at Hissam Forum in Charleston, and he and his wife live in Winifred. Please welcome Max Gotlieb.
There's an old witticism that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. But when those results are the continuous loss of innocent life, doing the same thing over and over again is not just dangerous, it's unacceptable. My name's Max, and thank you, Robert. I am what I consider to be a lifelong West Virginian. I'm a gun owner, and I'm a resident of Kanawha County. Now, I haven't always been a resident of Kanawha County. In the winter of 2012, 2013, I lived in DC, and I was working on the Hill. I remember when Hadiya was shot. I remember just about a month before that when the Sandy Hook massacre occurred. And I remember that in those following weeks and months, for the first time in my then fairly short life, I thought we were going to have change when it came to firearms. Specifically, I remember when the families of the Sandy Hook victims came to a number of legislative offices, and ours in particular. I remember the green pin with the tree of life that I got to adorn upon my lapel, and I even, this shows my age, in my relatively new Twitter account, got to post out a picture about supporting the families of Sandy Hook. I thought it was going to be different. But a decade has passed. My hair is not as thick and luscious as it was then, but nothing has changed. Same action, same results. Instead of trying something new, all we've done is what we continue to do, add more guns to the supposed solution, and yet have fewer responsibilities that comes with that ownership. Now, you probably noticed that little bit in between my own personal descriptors, the part that I stuck in the middle, that I'm a gun owner. I stuck that in the middle because despite what may be perceived, that fact does not matter for purposes of wanting common sense gun reform. In fact, it is gun owners themselves, responsible gun owners, that should know above everyone else that with the ownership of a gun comes great responsibility. You owe a heightened duty to not only store, but to handle that gun, that firearm, in a responsible and safe way, not just for yourself, not just for your family, but for everyone around you. You see, I'm wearing blaze orange. Hunters wear blaze orange. Why? Not because of violence that they may necessarily do to themselves, but because of accidents that can happen with these highly dangerous weapons. It's common sense, folks. It's common sense for gun owners, and it's common sense for those who don't own guns. The things are dangerous. And what do we do with dangers in this society? What does any reasonable group of collected individuals do when there's a danger? They act to mitigate the danger. Now, we often hear about how you can't fix mass shootings. You're never going to solve them. There is no panacea. And that's used as a defense to continue on our current course. Do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Doing the same thing that is doing nothing cannot persist. Now, certainly, in making change legislatively in our communities, we may make mistakes. There may be times we go too far, not far enough, not addressing the core issue, whatever they may be. But to make mistakes is human. I'm glad everybody has their wits about them. That's, I'm only shaking a little bit. Oh. Imagine if there was a firearm in this crowd. How scared would everyone be? But I'll conclude by just reminding everyone here, although I'm sure none of this crowd needs reminding, doing the same thing is not going to change any result. That's not only an insane course, but it's an inhumane course. Thank you.
I give out a salute to my fellow short guy. Solidarity. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Rick Griffith. He's a Democratic member of the West Virginia House of Delegates for the 19th District, which encompasses part of Wayne County. Prior to that, Delegate Griffith served 2 terms as Canova City Council President and 2 terms as Mayor of Canova. Please welcome Delegate Rick Griffith.
Thank you all, and I want to say something about Mike Pushkin. It has been a pleasure to work with him in the House, and his passion is tremendous for the issues he believes in. And he gets fired up, but this is the first time I've ever seen him have to use a fire extinguisher when he's speaking, as they had to put out the grill. I want to tell you a little something about, I was blessed with wonderful parents, and they gave me several lessons in life that affect me to this day. And I had a 9th grade science teacher who taught us the scientific method one day. And after she taught us that, she leaned over her desk and she pointed at us and said, "This applies to everything in life." And I sat there thinking, okay. And she said, think about it. What is the scientific method? You observe, you gather data, you experiment, then you draw conclusions. But she said what we do in life, with religion, with politics, with this issue and everything, we start with a conclusion. And we look for data to back up our preconceived notions. I had my uncle, my mom's older brother, was an Episcopal priest, and he gave me, when I was about 12 or 13 years old, a book of cartoons drawn by Charles Schulz, who eventually did the Peanuts. This is before he did the Peanuts cartoon, when he was a young cartoonist. And I still have today one of those cartoons. It shows a young man lying on his stomach in front of the fireplace, reading the Bible in the first picture. In the second picture, his father comes into the room and says, "Son, I'm pleased to see you consulting the Holy Scriptures." In the third picture, the young man looks up at his dad and says, "Don't get me wrong, Dad. I'm just looking up scriptures to back up my preconceived notions." That's what this issue has become for the people who resist common sense. And I'll tell you this, I'm elected from one of the reddest districts in the state of West Virginia. And probably tomorrow, my remarks here today will be posted by a couple of guys who do nothing but post things about how I vote, what I say, what I do, and they have literally tens of thousands of followers. Fortunately for me, most of them are outside of Wayne and Cabell County. However, for them, politics is a sport. One of them was one of the tourists that entered the Capitol on January 6th, and he's very proud of that. In fact, the helmet that he wore is now a religious shrine. When he makes public appearances in the county, people pose with the helmet. And the thing that I've tried to tell my friends that have opposed me on this issue is this: I'm not against the Second Amendment. I never owned a gun. If I went to college, I changed my major 3 times. You didn't do that back during the war in Vietnam. And when I went back for my 3rd year, I was running cross country at the University of Toledo. I'd never been to Toledo before, but they offered me a track scholarship and they had a pharmacy school. I'm a pharmacist, so I went there. And I called home to tell my mom I'd made it up there okay, and she was crying. I thought someone in the family had died, and I said, put Dad on the phone. And Dad said, son, apparently the draft board has the same opinion I do about your progress so far. I said, what do you mean? He said, you've changed your major 3 times. You've lost your student deferment. You've been drafted. So I just left school, went in the Army, and then, of course, told them I wanted to be a medic. I didn't want to carry a gun. So they made me a radio operator and sent me out in the jungle in Vietnam. And while I was out there and during that training, I got to fire an M60 machine gun. I got to fire an M16. I got to witness the destruction and the chaos of artillery from our fire base. And one day when we were out there, I looked at the other radio operator and I said, you know what bothers me? He said, what? I said, every time we get coordinates from units in the field and we crank up the phone to the artillery and they fire out a 3-round shot group with a 150-meter killing radius, a triangle that surrounds the location of the enemy. I said, I've started looking every time they do that at the map on the wall here in the command bunker. And I think sometimes we're hitting villages. Well, the colonel came down that tunnel. This was 3 o'clock in the morning. He cussed me up one side, down the other, and he said, you know what your problem is? You don't love your country. And being the idiot and smart aleck I was, I said, no, sir, my problem is this is not our country. And he tried to get even with me. And so I got to see some parts of the war that I wouldn't have seen on that fire base. And when I came home, I remember crossing the highway in San Francisco. One of the things that happened that upset me most was a rocket came in and killed a bunch of people in Dog Patch, the slum outside of our air base there, where a little Vietnamese boy, when I had my arm out, I'm left-handed, so I keep my watch in my right arm, he ripped off my watch and stole it. And the night before I came home, a rocket came in. I thought it hit the air base. It hit Dog Patch. And that little boy died due to the violence of a war. And so the next morning when we were getting ready to leave, I asked the lady, I said, which way will the plane take off? I just wanted to look at Dog Patch. And it took off the opposite way, she guessed. And I unbuckled my seatbelt and jumped up from my seat. And they were screaming, sit down, sit down. I just wanted to look out the window and see Dog Patch. I could still see the wing, and it turned out over the South China Sea, and we came home. Well, when we crossed the highway, coming into San Francisco, and everyone cheered, we were home. I looked down, and as the plane crossed the highway, a school bus went underneath us. And I saw about a 10-year-old boy looking out the window at a plane landing. And I thought, you have no idea how lucky you are to be born where you are, when you are. He was the same age as that kid. I finished pharmacy school, I came home, and was stupid enough to get involved in politics. And this speech might be my last after my friends back in Wayne County get a hold of it. But I've thought about something over and over again. The scientific method. You observe, you gather data, you experiment, then you draw a conclusion. The problem today with this issue is the people promoting and blocking common sense legislation are so dug in, they won't do the scientific method. Now, I'm going to propose something to you that may not be the type of thing you were hoping to hear from me. One of our problems is, and Danielle and Mike and I are testimony to this, there's hardly anybody in the legislature in support of your issue. We've got to get some people elected. And here's what I think we need to do. We need to set goals that are reasonable. 3 times, Delegate Larry Rowe and I tried to amend some bills to get some of the then $1.3 billion surplus towards school safety. And they got shot down by party lines every time. I'm going to work with Mike and Larry and others. I want to try to create a piece of legislation before all of the surplus is given away, primarily to the wealthiest people in West Virginia, but after it's given away, we have an opportunity to fix the physical safety of our schools, the procedures, man traps coming in. There are schools in my county, there's one in particular I think about, that has 2 doors that are unlocked all day long because they're broken. So at night, they put a chain through the handles. The fire marshal won't let them do it in the day. We're rolling the dice. I want us to try to see, and you all to help us, get good Republicans and conservatives involved in, okay, we're not going to do anything about gun legislation at the moment, but let's at least make our children safer in their schools and get a piece of legislation for them. Here's how I think it'll help. We've got an election year coming up, and they that are totally against any adjustment in gun laws can say, I did something for school safety. Let's win them over. Let's get them to work cooperatively and do this. Now, I may not be around after this speech to vote on that thing. I joke about that, but I'm serious. This is what's going on. They are very good at messaging, using the internet. We need, and they view you as radical, unreasonable people. They misjudge you, and they won't compromise. We've got to try to reach and make some gains, step by step. We're at the ballot box to get some reasonable people of both parties elected, but also with something like this where we can say we have the safest schools in the country, and we've got the money to do it. My ominous prediction is, as more and more tax cuts take place, they're going to come back in 6 or 8 years and say, well, we really like this program, but we don't have the money for it. We got the money now. Please help us get this done. Thank you all very much, and you have my admiration.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you for your service. And our keynote speaker to wrap things up this afternoon is Deanna Mckinney. She's a former Charleston Councilwoman who represented the citizens of Charleston's 6th Ward. She's also a mother and a gun violence survivor, having lost her son, Tamel, to gun violence in 2014. Councilwoman McKinney is also a social activist. She's the CEO of the GIFT, God is There for Togetherness project, which strives to promote community unity and help others move past loss. Please welcome Deanna McKinney.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the faces that are out here to bring awareness and togetherness against gun violence in our community. This is something near and dear to my heart, and it's not only because I lost my son, because gun violence has always been a part of my life because of my area, my neighborhood, my culture. So gun violence has just always been there. So once I lost my son to gun violence, I did not want his name to be in the line of drugs, gangs, and certain things. So I made sure I got out and I got involved. I kept his name alive, as well as others. I have been a part of Moms Demand Action for 9 years. When I first lost my son and I got a text saying, you know, if you need some help, if you want to come get the support. And I went to the Capitol, but it was about bills. It wasn't about me, healing me, helping me to overcome the trauma that I've experienced. And I still stuck it out for 9 years. But it's time that I'm looking for support for us as survivors now. We always talking about the laws and the legislation and things like that, but we are not talking about the people and the lives that are being affected by the gun violence. Guns are not the problem, violence is the problem. And when you deal with the violence, you realize you have mental health, you have abuse, you have neglect, you have all these things that we can actually tackle before a person touch a gun and use it in a violent manner. So now I'm starting an initiative called United Against Gun Violence, and this is for education, to work as far as together to learn how to protect ourselves. Right now, if my life was in danger, I would die because I don't know how to use a gun. I never had a gun. I don't know anything about a gun. And that's not fair to me. So I shouldn't lose my life because of fear of a gun. If I use a gun, I would be responsible. If I use a gun, I would use it when I'm supposed to use it. And that's the things that we need to start teaching. That's the thing we need to start thinking about. Guns is not the problem, violence is the problem. How are we going to address the violence in our communities? How are we going to deal with the brokenhearted? How are we going to deal with the mental illness? How are we going to deal with the drug addiction? These are the things that lead to violence, which becomes part of guns. And that's what I really want people to start thinking about. Because we keep fighting against the NRAs and all these other people. You're right, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm wrong. No. Let's really focus on what the problem is. And the problem is the violence. And when we think about hurt and harm, hurt people hurt people. So if we start focusing on how to heal our community and heal people in the community, gun violence will come down. Because when you think about all these lives that you see against that wall, they all have a story. All of them have been neglected. All of them have been mistreated. Some have been abused. They have stories. And nobody took the time to learn their story to help them to still be on this earth. And I was there for my son. So when I lost my son, I was able to realize gun violence don't have a name, an age, a dollar amount. It don't matter how much money you got. It don't matter. Anybody can be affected by gun violence. So we really need to think about that. We really need to think about the people that are left behind, the survivors. We want people to go vote. We want people to become leaders. How can we do that without helping them heal? You know, we always go into the person that can give us an idea, but we're not going to the person who actually has the problem. A lot of times people don't want to step out of their comfort zone and go directly to these families and to these people and say, how may I truly help you? How can I help you? Somebody did that for me. Her name is Dr. Carolyn Stewart. She came to my house right after my son was murdered and said, how can I help you? How can I help you help yourself? And that changed my life. It changed that moment from being sad and being confused and feeling lonely to feeling empowered, feeling like I had a voice, feeling like I needed something to do, feeling like I had to get back to my community. And that's the initiative that I'm hoping to start through the Gift Project. It's for God is for Togetherness. I've had this nonprofit for 9 years since my son's passing. I have not really used it. I have not put it out there because everything I do, I did from my heart. I did it because it had to be done. But now is the time that I'm trying to get a support system to where we are building a support system to help our survivors, help take care of them, help them heal, help them be educated, help them get back into society, help them to take care of the other kids that they still have left behind. Because when you lose a child or you lose a loved one, a part of you goes with them, that person. So how do we fulfill that empty spot? How do we help them to truly heal? And that's the initiative that I'm working on. On June 24th, I am holding an event on Magic Island. It's going to start at 4 o'clock, and it's going to show what gun violence looks like in this community. I encourage people to come out, support the event, because it's about education, it's about awareness, it's about prevention. And I think once we start there and start actually talking to the people and dealing with the actual violence in our community, we could really make a difference when it comes to the gun violence here. Thank you.
One more time for Deanna Mckinney. And thank you, Deanna, for making the food happen. It's all been delicious. I just want to remind everyone, tomorrow night we have another event that's in support of Gun Violence Prevention Weekend. And it's at Taylor Books. It begins at 7:30. It's going to feature the musical duo of Springsteen and Robin. And where's Robin? There he is. He is over there. That's the Robin half of it. And it's going to be from 7:30 to 9:30. And all donations, tips that that the band gets, they are going to graciously donate to Mom's Demand, actually here in West Virginia. Okay? Also, if you haven't seen them, we've got a couple of the QR codes are posted around here. If you want to make a donation to help us keep working and keep making progress on reducing gun violence in our state and in our community, please open your pocketbooks. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the evening and safe travels home.